right. So, yeah, nice to be here on a dark Tuesday evening, early evening. Nice to be with you guys. We were just chatting, and topic of mental overload and mental overwhelm came up, and I was also thinking about mental strength and discipline and how these things all fit together and building that. So that'll be the topic I'll dwell on a bit later. So first, I don't know, perhaps everybody's favorite bit. We can just do some meditation together, just to reset and reboot our minds a bit. So, for meditation, the traditional posture is sitting with your back straight, but you can meditate while you're walking. You can meditate while you're slouching, lying down. Um, just be careful. If you're walking, you don't trip over anything, so do it with your eyes open. But sometimes helps close our eyes, just slow down or shut out some possible distractions. We just take a deep breath. The deep breath just stretches us internally. It changes our focus, gives our mind something very different, very simple to begin to focus on, to dwell on. Take another breath and just invite ourselves to relax and just trigger this relaxation response. There's nothing we have to do other than just rest and pay attention and allow our mind to become peaceful. We can take another deep breath and just ask ourselves, what is important right now? And then as we're breathing, we can notice that our mind is paying attention to something that's happening immediately right now, as opposed to many other thoughts that might be pulling our mind away. So we try to become aware of the feelings in our body and the feelings throughout our body. And in reality, they don't have a name. Some feeling of tingling, some feeling of warmth or pain, coolness. Feelings that are hard to describe if you just feel them as opposed to naming them. One of the most notable feelings is the change as we breathe in and out. We may feel it in our belly, or our chest, or our nose. You might even feel it a little bit in your hands and feet, some slight change in the feeling as you're breathing in and out deeply. But we don't need to control our breath. We just kind of let it happen, but just feel it a bit. Our minds are busy. It's natural if memories, thoughts, plans, ideas are popping in and out of our head. But we can notice that our breathing is still happening, whether we pay attention or not. Just keep noticing it's still happening. This life force moving inside us. Our breath may seem uninteresting, but we can ask, is there anything more important than this life force that's constantly sustaining me? Is there anything more important in my life than this breath that is sustaining me? And if we've noticed any feeling of relaxation, peace, you can just enjoy that. Maybe it's subtle. We just develop a taste for that. And then we can develop a feeling of gratitude, just reflecting on everyone and everything who's helped us to get where we are today. From the people who've helped, taught, and raised us, to the food that we eat, how much is involved in bringing us to this place where we are right now. And we can feel a sense of gratitude. And then with this feeling of gratitude, we can think we are changing moment by moment. Everything we do changes us, lays down patterns and habits that strengthen the good qualities we need. So we can set an intention to use this brief time together to strengthen all of our inner good qualities so we can be of greater benefit to others. And then with this intention, we can open our eyes and rise from our meditation. So there have been a couple of famous leaders on my mind recently, and interesting the radically different examples that they show. One of them, of course, is our dear president, very determined to not acknowledge any faults that he might possess and to maintain complete control and status and so forth at all costs. And the other is a guy you may not have heard of, but he runs the biggest company in the world. So the biggest company, give or take, in the world by revenue, in terms of the amount of revenue they pull in. I'll skip the quiz, but often if you quiz people, you ask, what's the company in the world that has the most revenue? And people are like, Apple, Amazon, go through a list. It's Visa. Visa has about 8 or 10 times more revenue than Apple and Amazon. There's a lot of money passing through Visa. The guy who runs Visa, or ran Visa for a long time, founded Visa, created it. It's a guy that almost nobody's heard of. His name is Dee Hock, D-E-E, Hock. And he's an interesting character. He was just some bank manager in the 60s, and then Bank of America wanted to spin up a credit card program or something, wanted somebody to help. And he, through some series of coincidences, became the one who was in charge of this program, and he convinced Bank of America to spin it off as a separate organization, and that originally was Bank Americard, I think, and then became Visa. And he managed to find himself as the head of a company that was suddenly like handling almost all of the world's financial transactions on a daily basis. That's needless to say, that's potentially a lot of power and a lot of wealth. Now, I don't know him very well. I found his Twitter account, and his Twitter account is just a steady stream of wisdom. He has maybe 10,000 followers on Twitter. He follows no one. He follows nobody else. Every day posts something, and they're incredibly wise. All of these points that he makes, and he was extraordinarily careful at architecting the business of Visa so that power could not possibly be centralized. That there was no way to centralize power or control. And that it's a highly distributed organization and no centralized power control in Visa as a company. He set it up, he stabilized it, he grew it to maturity, and then he stepped down and spent 10 years just working on a farm in California. Bought 200 acres of land somewhere in Northern California, started working a farm. And he came back into the public scene and wrote a couple of books. And in a summary statement, he said, there's 4 beasts in the minds of every person. Let me see if I get these right. Ego, avarice or greed, jealousy, I think it was, and arrogance. And that these 4 beasts tend to always start as little puppies, very cute, and then they grow and eventually they devour their master. And in this speech that he gave, he said, I feel my greatest achievement in life is that I feel like I have kept these beasts in check. These beasts of ego and avarice and jealousy and arrogance, pride. So he wrote this book called The Chaotic, or The Birth of the Chaotic Organization. Chaos and order, some combination anyway. So quite a contrast to, for example, our president, focused on maintaining power at any cost and never acknowledging any faults. So it's a very strong statement for someone to, like Dee Hock, to get up in front of this big organization and talk about these 4 beasts that live inside his mind and everybody's mind and have the potential to devour him, but he feels like comfortable that he's kept them in check. But that's not the voice of someone who's invulnerable. That is, in fact, the voice of somebody who knows their own vulnerability. So there are knowledges, there are pieces of knowledge that are obvious and priceless at the same time, and rare. And one is just the knowledge of our own mortality. That alone is actually obvious, but something that our mind hides from ourselves. Like we don't want to grapple with that, acknowledge that. Also, our own imperfection, our own vulnerability, susceptibility to these inner beasts or inner demons, or whatever we want to call them. So it takes humility. It takes humility to acknowledge those things. And there's something very funny that goes on with the stories that we tell ourselves. I started off this series of classes talking about man as a storytelling primate, humans as storytelling primates. And there's a primate here, but there's also all these stories, right? And we tend to tell ourselves these stories. The main story that we tell is the story of ourself and who we are. And the story that we tell ourselves about ourselves, I don't know who's telling the story. It's all a little bit, right? But there's an implicit story. When we tell a story about somebody else, like he's such a jerk, implicitly we're telling a story about ourselves. There is a story about us, right? We say he's such a jerk. It implies that I have the ability to know a jerk when I see one, first of all, and it generally implies that I'm not a jerk. And I wouldn't want to associate with jerks. right? So there's a lot hidden in just one simple observation about somebody else. There's a lot hidden that, and including this idea about ourselves. And one of the things that's been on my mind a lot is this, this, this sort of gets into the working world, but this tendency, um, there's just, I don't know, it's a law of physics. I don't know, somebody could figure out how it works, but what the exact technical explanation is, but it's easier to start things than it is to finish them. I don't know where in physics that is, but it's always very easy to start a project, and it's kind of fun. There's a new project, new idea, you got a new idea, and you just go off chasing after it. But it's quite hard to finish a project. In fact, even declaring when something is done is kind of arbitrary, because you can always, you know, try to improve and never declare something done. So it's a bit of an art just being able to step away from something. But it takes some discipline for us to try to finish things. And I'm talking to myself here as I'm talking to you. So don't mistake this from a position, as me speaking from a position of righteousness. This is me speaking from a position of experience. So it's very easy to start things, get excited about ideas, and take on this and take on that. And but it's I've had a tendency to generate huge to-do lists, lots of ideas, very ambitious ideas, and I've done a lot of them, but I have not done the vast majority. And so you're sort of spinning off these half-finished projects and so forth. Now, in contrast to that, it takes some discipline to try to finish things and to not start things, but it also takes discipline to just have some humility about our own capacity, right? That there is a gap between what we think is a good idea and what we can actually accomplish. And that gap is pretty massive. And when it comes down to it, we're one person with a fairly finite amount of time. No, sorry, we're one person with a finite amount of time. And also a finite amount of mental capacity and mental energy and so forth. And what's tricky is that there's a lot of invisible factors happening. One invisible factor is how we see ourselves. Like our sense of ourselves quite implicit and hidden from our mind. But another invisible factor is that our energy levels go up and down over the course of the day. Like, you might notice in the morning, you've got a lot of brilliant ideas. And by the time, at least for me, a lot of brilliant ideas in the morning, by the time the afternoon rolls around, all the meetings have stopped. I've got a bit more free time. But suddenly all of the brilliant ideas are a lot less clear than they were in the morning. And I've got a lot less mental energy to focus and to try to carry them out. And so I'll notice myself, opening the news on my web browser. And it's a signal for me that my mind's a little bit tired. Now, there's a part of us that keeps trying to push. Like, notice I don't go and take a break and rest, but I'll open the news to look at the news because it's very low energy. It takes not much energy from my side. Nobody, if I open CNN, nobody at CNN is expecting me to do anything. If I open an email, there is a very, very, very grave danger that someone's going to ask me to do something. So I am much more likely to open CNN if my mind is tired than I am to open an email. Because every time I open an email, it's like half the time there's a project hiding in there. And I'm like, oh no. So we develop these little subtle areas of dread. And for me, my email inbox is an area of dread. And so so if you ever want me to do anything, don't email me. Send me a text message or instant messenger. I'm much better with those, but because it's a smaller stack of stuff and they rarely turn into projects. So your mental terrain, it's kind of an invisible terrain. There's certain things we find easy and fun and comfortable, and certain things where we have a bit of subtle dread, right? And there's areas that we're strong and there's areas that we're weak. And to make all of it more complex, right, it changes from moment to moment. Like we're in the mornings we have more energy for some things, the afternoons we have less energy, and so forth. So it's quite an art learning how to work with ourselves and to learning how to notice these little signs like mental overload or mental overwhelm, like we were talking about before the class started. So one trick that so the most basic trick that I learned when I was doing a lot of computer programming is to stop working and go take a walk. If you're really stuck on something, computer programming is interesting because it's the kind of thing where you can hit a roadblock and be stuck on it for like hours and days and just like have no idea how to start sometimes. There are other domains where you get into that, but so computer programmers are very familiar with getting like stuck and just not knowing how to break through. And number one trick is take a walk, take a nap, take a shower, take a break, something, just temporary break. And then what often happens is that when you give your mind a chance to rest instead of having this inner tyrant, this inner slave driver in our heads that's saying, you must work, you must push through all the time. But there's a balance, of course, because, it is important for us to have a discipline to, continue persevering towards whatever important activities we think we need to accomplish, but at the same time, giving ourselves a chance to have a rest. And in this context, one helpful tip that I received once and worked through is imagine, or actually, this is, I haven't talked about this much for a while, but journaling in the sense of writing a little note to yourself. If you feel stuck, like imagine channeling someone who's a good friend and to ask them some advice. I feel really stuck about this or afraid about this, or, if it's a big deal. If you write advice to yourself as if it was coming from a good friend, it tends to be fairly sympathetic, often much more sympathetic than the advice we give ourselves, which tends to be like, well, you better keep going and don't quit. But sometimes our mind has quit, like we've lost mental energy. And we just can't be effective, we can't be productive. And one area, I talked to a friend of mine this morning who's in India, and they are going into lockdown, or a curfew in India. I don't know if it's nationwide or his city or whatever. So everybody has to close up shop at 7 p.m. and be inside. And curfews are pretty common, but but it's a bit puzzling, like, how does a curfew help? And I'm sure there's a good public health explanation for how curfews help stop the spread of an infectious disease, but like COVID works perfectly fine during the daytime, just as well as it does at night. And but at least pending somebody else giving me a better explanation, here's my explanation. People who are out doing stuff after 7 p.m., often it's in non-essential activities, often they're a little low on mental energy. They're in relaxation mode, right? Often they're drinking, they're just hanging out, and they're being a lot more casual. And so our sense of judgment gets a bit weaker or substantially weaker. So if we're tired, end of the day, long, stressful day, trying to blow off a bit of steam, especially if we've had alcohol, something like that, our judgment, not nearly as good, right? Our judgment about how close are we to another person? Are we wearing a mask? What are we touching? And so forth. And it's a little bit similar to, they say, people's brains, human brains, are not fully developed until they're age 25. So your ability to gauge risk is severely underdeveloped especially from the onset of puberty until you're about 25. Now, a friend of mine commented that they don't accept people into the military if they're older than 25. And at least in my mind, I put these two together and I'm like, okay, yeah, anybody older than 25 is not going to be willing to always follow orders, in situations where otherwise your judgment would say, no, this looks like a very bad idea. So the military may depend on people whose sense of assessment of risk and judgment is not fully baked. Now, my life is, I skipped the military, I skipped the bars and so forth. I followed the path of clean living. But I know as a monk, right, like we're supposed to live a very disciplined life, but I know my mind gets tired. Like even as a monk, like 9 p.m., my mind's tired. And I find myself like much more casual about like what I'm doing, what I'm thinking and so forth in the evening. So all of this is to say that we need to have the humility to acknowledge that there is this inner judgment faculty, this inner decision-making faculty that is a precious, precious part of our mind, and it's not always as strong as it is, and so we need to have respect for taking a break, stepping away from a situation if we're a bit tired, not making decisions if we're a bit tired, not putting ourselves in situations where our judgment may be impaired and in ways that are detrimental to ourselves or others. So giving ourselves a break is probably the best approach to mental overwhelm. Instead of trying to whip ourselves forward and onwards and so forth, well past the point where our mind is at optimal capacity. Now, at the same time that we need to be humble and respectful of our mind's limits, we also need to strengthen these faculties of judgment, these decision-making faculties, and strengthen our ethical decision-making. And every time we develop good intention and we follow through with that, it strengthens these little habits, these little pathways of good habits. And so I saw again, I still haven't read it to completion, but I mentioned at the beginning of these series, there's a book, a very popular book called Atomic Habits. And the premise of the book, Atomic Habits, is that habits are laid down at an atomic level, one small action at a time. And that we need to have respect for the power of the cumulative power of small actions. And so the cumulative power of a habit, we build habits in this kind of way, having the habit of taking a break when we need a break, but having a habit also of trying to finish things instead of starting them, having a habit of recognizing our own faults and being humble about them and trying to keep our own faults in check. And fundamentally, this is a training in mental discipline. And mental discipline at least in the Buddhist tradition, is likened to like the body, and concentration is likened to a hand, and wisdom is likened to an axe. And so it's said with the body of moral discipline, the sort of general strength of your mind, and the hand of concentration, which the hand provides fine-grained control. And so that's what we're doing in meditation. We're trying to get control over our attention, but really meditation is just the fine-grained, finessed part of mental discipline and mental strength. The main challenge is having the discipline to get yourself to a meditation class or to get yourself to sit in meditation. That's actually where almost all of the work happens. Once that has happened, then the actual meditation is quite easy. You could just fall asleep and you'll end the class being rested and more peaceful than you were at the beginning. So the meditation part is actually the easy part. To the discipline part that's hard. But the discipline part carries into every single aspect of our life. It's not just getting yourself to meditation. meditation class, it's the discipline part is being careful with how we speak, right? Being careful to speak in respectful ways, being careful with our actions, that we're not harming others, and even being careful with our thoughts, like not plotting harm on others, and increasingly focusing on the well-being of others instead of ourselves, and considering the impact of our actions and taking great care in our actions. That's how we really build this mental strength. Just to finish the analogy again, sorry, with the body of moral discipline or mental discipline, the hand of concentration, and the axe of wisdom, you can chop down the tree of your ignorance. So it's not a push for deforestation. It's just a traditional analogy. We need the sharp, incisive wisdom, understanding, just changing our perception of the world, the stable mind through concentration, but then this inner strength of discipline, and that's built with these atomic habits. We layer on this discipline just by having an intention, trying to carry through with it. And yeah, discipline, but gentle discipline, not abusive discipline, not abusing ourselves, just gently strengthening, reaffirming these strong mental pathways of good decision making, wise decision making. So that's my thought on mental strength and mental overload and the balance of those. And then as our mental strength increases, then our capacity will increase, but we can take it all gradually. So okay, so why don't we take a few minutes just to let that sink in with some final meditation, and maybe I don't know, from myself, maybe in all these cases, meditate on whatever's moving you more deeply. But for me, I like the idea of every habit, every action that we do lays down the foundations of a habit. So every time we carry through a good intention, that strengthens our mind. So maybe meditate on that. All right, as usual, take a deep breath in and out just to reset. Another deep breath just to relax. And then we can think every single action matters. Little actions, big actions, every single one lays down these mental pathways and is a chance for us to strengthen our good decision making. Even the action of focusing on our breath moment by moment is building these mental habits to point us to a peaceful state of mind. Everything we do every day is layering down these powerful potentials. we may feel powerless, but our power builds very subtly, gradually, on an atomic level with every action that we engage in. So this is the practice of discipline and patience, being contented with ourselves, but also being determined to build our mental strength one action at a time. And the power is inside, in our hands. We have the power to build our own mental capacity one action at a time. And so we can recall that feeling of gratitude to everyone and everything that's helped us to reach where we are right now. And think, may this brief class, our actions together, be steps leading us in that direction, in the direction of being able to repay the kindness of others. With that good motivation, we can arise from our meditation.